Okay, well, today's webinar is on selection processes. What we'll do is go in and start by looking at a pre-built form. Some of you may recognize this. We used this in some of our demos last year. But basically, selection processes are used to build a list of items so the user can click on one and bring that data back into the form. This hyperlink calls up a pre-built search, so I will simply click on it, and you'll notice it now prompts me for client name, city, and town. I can enter a piece of a client name here, everything that has AP in its name, and click on search. Oops. Hold on one second. Sorry about that, guys. I was playing around with this, and I want to make sure. Let's get rid of that. And go into, sorry about that, guys. Let me just clean up a little bit so I can start from scratch. And take this out of there. So, okay, let's try that again. So when I go into search, type in AP, enter on the search bar, brings up everything that has AP in its name and allows me to either click on one of those items, scroll forward and back through the pages. There's only one page in this case. Select a page, go to a specific page number, refine the search so I can say, okay, show me things with PA in its name and refine it. And it comes back with two items. Now this refine is a destructive refine. So I can't get back to where I was from this point. Even if I took this out and hit refine, it doesn't get me back there. So it's a destructive refine. Okay, so let's go in and take a look and see how we build these items. So on the side menu, we click on selection process. The selection process works very similar to the forms designer. You need a file name and a selection name to build the search. These searches are stored in a file called DBI select. And what happens is when DesignBais builds this search for the first time, it will build a form on the fly to produce that selection process that you see. So the ID in this DBI select file is file name underscore select name. So we'll start with that particular select was DB client underscore search. So let's look at that. The select description is the name of what this selection process is going to do, and that will pop up in the title bar of the modal window. The style group that you want to use, I like to use the same style group that I use for my form on my selection process. Selection process alternative, that allows you to create an alternative selection. We'll get into that a little later in this webinar, but I'm going to skip that for now. So now DesignBais is allowing me to create the first selection of this form. So I can tell it to do a straight select, a sort select, a Q select, or an N select. I'm going to just stick with S select. And the file name that I want to use to select the file. Now, the file name that's used to select the file, the IDs that are getting stored to bring back to the calling form are going to be these IDs that were selected. Okay, so if you select this file and expect the IDs to come back from this file, you're not going to be happy with the result. So you're looking for the IDs. This selection is bringing back the IDs for this file. So now I can create my selection criteria using any of these connectives, with, and with, or, and the dictionary that I'm selecting it from. So basically what I'm doing is building a TCL/English/access command to select the file. So sort select DB client with client name and any operation that I want to put in there. I may want to use no name so that I can say with client name. So it'll select everything that has a client name in it. So you see we have equal, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, like and unlike. These left WC and right WC, WC stands for wildcard search. So this is anything the user puts in the field is going to be surrounded by these brackets. Sometimes you want to use them, sometimes you don't. You notice that this and with suburb doesn't use it because it wants the entire suburb entered. So I'm doing with client name equal to whatever's in brackets entered in entry point 1. Entry point 1 is defined down here in these entry points. So this entry point is defined as DB client, the DB client name. So DesignBais will place this field as the first item on the form. So if I do a test search here, you see where it's prompted me for client name. This is the same field that you would use if you were adding it to a form. So any subroutine calls that are attached to this field in the field properties are going to be called when the user enters in the client name. So any before processes, any after processes, any lookup files are going to be active in this input field. You can put in an alternate description here. So instead of saying client name, I can say something like Rick's client, and then test it, and you see where it says up here instead of client name, it says Rick's client. So depending on the selection process, you can change the text that's being displayed to the user by entering it in this entry description. If nothing is there, it's going to use the description, the screen label from the field properties of DBC client name. I can also change the field width on the selection. You'll notice that it's pretty big right here. I can change that to, let's just say, 100 pixels for now. And we'll search it, and you see it changed the width to 100 pixels. Take that back out again. Okay, now we have a not null field. By default, all of these connectives are optional, which means that if the user doesn't enter anything in client name, it's going to remove with DBC client name equal to completely off of the selection. We also have the ability to make it mandatory. So a user has to enter in something in client name before the selection will be allowed to proceed. We can accept a null so that if a null value is entered in client name, it'll say with client name equal to null. We can hide this selection. So maybe we want to say something like with flag equal to 1. And I could put a 1 in here and then make this hidden so that the user won't see that selection process. I can also have it disabled. And there is room for an append sentence. And you see that we're appending to the end of this by client name. So now the next command would be a connective and with suburb equal to whatever is entered in entry point 2, being DBC suburb. you can actually change the record that you're using if you don't want it to relate to the record that is populated in your parent form. So I'm already using DB record in my parent form under DBC client name. So when I run this, if I enter something in client name and click on the search, you'll see it puts it into the client name field. Because they're the same, it's the same record, and we're preserving comment going between the parent form and this modal form. So any fields are going to be moved over and used. If you don't want DesignBais to use that field on the form, simply change the entry variable. So to use a different entry variable. And of course, this dictionary name, this field name must exist in that file. Any questions about those two items before we move on? If you haven't guessed already, this is going to be a fairly quick presentation. So it'll probably be about 45 minutes, a half an hour to 45 minutes. Okay, so if we bring up the search process again and say, I don't know what towns are out there, probably New York, and search. Oh, I guess not. Let's bring up everything, and let's look at a town. Let's just do Ashland. There we go. So you can see that it removed client name from the selection process and simply just used the city and town of Ashland. Okay. So now we need to tell DesignBais what fields to enter to display on the form once the file is selected. And that's very simple to do. You just simply add the field name. So this is a multi-value grid. You just add as many names as you want. And this grid is actually unlimited. So you can have as many fields in this display as you like. And when DesignBais displays it, it's simply going to allow the user to scroll over to display that information. So I put in client name, and the key when it's selected is going to be the item key as item key. So we don't, when that field is selected, we don't want DesignBais to put in the client name and send that back to the form. We want to use the item key, the key to the file. Do I want to provide refinement? So when the search process is built, I want to have refinement down on the bottom here. So those fields are set up for refinement. There's a couple. There's DBC suburb and DBC client name. And the size in width in pixels. So how wide? This will default to a calculation based on the size of the field in characters in the field properties. But you can always come back in here and change this. So I have phone number, website, email address, address 1, suburb, state, postal code, country, class, and manager. And the only two providing refinement are suburb and client name. So if we test this search just the way it is, you'll notice in previous versions of DesignBais, the only column that you were allowed to click on were the ones that you fed the return key, that you set up as return key. Now DesignBais allows you to select any item, any field within that range, and it will bring back the ID of the record unless you tell it something different. So, for instance, I can actually leave this as no, and instead of website returning the key, I want it to return the website as displayed. So when I click on the website, it'll return to me the website instead of the key to this file. Turn that back off. So now every field is clickable, and you really don't have to tell it that one of these fields is the key to your file. So any field that the user clicks on now, since I took that selection, that return field off of website, it's now going to return, whoops, well, I guess I have to have one. Sorry about that. Key. Search. So let's, yeah, there we go. You have to have one item in your, the first item in your form has to have the item key in it as item key. So now I can select anything, scroll over and say, oh, this is the one I want in that zip code. And it'll still return the same ID. Any questions about that? Now, to use this process, let's go in and look at this form, and we'll call up the properties of that hyperlink. So you can see it is simply a search process. It's just a button that's labeled b.search. Every button has to have a b, has to be prefaced by a b dot. The field on the label is client code. The process after. So after the user clicks on this button, where do I want it to go? So I'm calling a search process, dbClient_search. I'm telling DesignBais that this search is what I want to run when that hyperlink is clicked. The display label, this is a format that comes with DesignBais, search label new and search label new hover. The first piece before the comma is the normal state of the button, and after the comma is the hover state. So that when you look at it, you really can't see it here. Let's save it and turn the test mode on. You can see that when I hover over it, it changes color. Let's go back into the properties. Whoops, properties is the wrong field. Now, you also have to have a return field. What DesignBais does with this is it says once the user clicks on one of the items, I'm going to send the ID back to this field and process it as if the user entered it. So when I select one of the ID, when I select one of the records, the client code will go back into DBC client code and run it like the user pressed that key, enter that data, and press the tab. Any questions about the setup of this search label? Okay. Okay, now we'll go down to these items down here. Page numbering. You would always want to have page numbering on unless it's a relatively small list. If page numbering is on, you will get page 1 of X with a previous and next button. You'll also get select page and an input box and go to page number. And DesignBais will fit as many items on the screen as it can and then build a new page. If you check this off and run the search, you will get one long list Now you notice you don't have any page breaks. You'll get one long list. For short lists, that's great, but keep in mind even a 100 or 200 record database will take time to get to the user. So you're better off checking the page numbering and let DesignBais handle it. Auto-select of a single item. If in the selection, if we search it, and we go to, when we type in APO, which I know there's only one item out there, and refine it, because there's only one item that came up in the search, if that is checked, it will automatically send back that key that was found. Perform selection on load. Sometimes this is good for small lists. When I check it on, what it'll do is it'll automatically select the file as if no items were input in the two fields. For large lists, a million record database, you probably don't want to do that. You want to have the user enter some data before the search is processed, so that DesignBais doesn't have to select all of those, build the list, and then send it to the user. So I normally have that checked off unless it's a small list that takes up 1 or 2 pages. Multivalue select. That's used in a multivalue list, so a multivalue grid. You can set the header to a selection process so that when you click on the header, you can select multiple items. So I can say I want this item, I want this item, and I want this item. And what you also get is an accept button. So that once you're done selecting the items that you want, you click the accept button. In this case, I'm only returning the one item, so it doesn't really matter. It's only returning the first one because it's not an actual multi-value grid. But it will bring all 3 items back, load them into the grid as they were separate line items, and each of those line items that I selected, those 3, it would add 3 multi-values to the grid, 3 multi-value entries to the grid. The size of the form in depth and width. So you can see right now it's fairly small. If I change the width, the depth, to, let's say, 800, you can see the grid grows. The page grows down. And I can change it to, let's say, 1,000 on this side. And when I search, I get more items coming down the page and a wider page going across. So before I think we saw like 10 or 15 items. Well, now we see more because the page is bigger. Change this back. Okay, any questions about that so far? Okay, now let's talk about some of these other processes. What if the select that you're running is a very complex select? Maybe it does a select of one file and then selects another file and then brings back those IDs, and you want them to come back into your form, into your selection process. Well, to do that, you would have to use an alternate selection. So this would be a subroutine. We press F1, you can see here that the process event is create selection. So if we put in db, if I could type, I'd be dangerous. RW. So that's a program that I have created. Let's go and look at this. Control Home. You can see that db.i.dbclient.rw is there. And the create selection, we scroll down a bit, you can see my create selection, and it's doing a go sub create selection. So let's jump down to that section of the form. And it's saying, if the event source equals dbClient underscore search, then start building a variable called select, SEL, select the dbClient. Now, every field that's on the form, that selection process, the data that's entered in that form, or in those fields, are stored in a common block variable called dbUsageVar, and it's offset by 10. So the first one on the form is dbUsageVar 11. The second one is dbUsageVar 12. So dbClientName is going to be dbUsageVar 11, and dbSuburb is going to be dbUsageVar 12. So once the user enters those items and clicks on the search button, this create selection is processed. So it's saying if dbUsageVar 11 does not equal a null, which means somebody entered some information in the client name, then add with dbC client name equal to whatever's in brackets in dbUsageVar 11. If dbUsageVar 12 does not equal a null, then what I got to do is check to see that dbUsageVar 11 was not used. If it was, add a connector saying and, add the connector to the selection with dbSuburb equal to dbUsageVar 12. And then execute the select. Now DesignBais is expecting the list that's being returned to be returned to a common block variable called dbReturn.select1. Select left paren, 1 right paren. So all of the item IDs are going into this common block variable. DesignBais expects that and is looking for that on the back end. So you need to do a return list and dbReturn.select1. So all those items are going in there. I'll just make sure this is compiled and cataloged. And let's go back to our form, and we will save it. Let's make sure that this is saved. Submit that. And we'll run this form, and we'll click on the client code. Now remember, it's not using the selection process from the it's not using the criteria from the selection process. It's using a program. So I can say AP and search, and it comes back with the same items. We can identify that a little bit by coming down to the bottom and saying, let's go to home, dbds -1 equals, let's see the select, SEL. Just so that you can see that it is actually doing that. AP, search, bang. Okay, so it's doing the select properly. Any questions about that? Okay. Go back to the selection. Search. Let's take that out. The after display event. You know what? I'm going to skip the after display event for a second, because there's a reason why I'm doing that. Let's go to the before selection. Before selection is used to validate the fields that are on the form. So after a user enters some fields, maybe there has to be some kind of relationship between the fields. So this before selection is before the select actually happens, we're doing a validate against the fields. Okay, so if I put in my subroutine here and submit it, well, the item is before selection. So I'm saying if the event source equals the form that we're looking at, if db usage var 11 equals null and db usage var 12 equals a null, then display an error message that you must have a, it's not a phone number, it's a suburb. So you must have either a client name or a suburb, and then sending that to the glossary to check to see if this is in the user's glossary. There is a full webinar on glossary maintenance later on in these webinar sessions. So we're doing that. Control EI to submit that, and let's bring that up again. Now I won't put anything in either of these fields, and I'll click on the search. So you see now it's coming back and telling me that you must enter a client name or suburb, and automatically aborting the selection process. So that's a way to validate the data that's being entered on the form. So if this is a start date and an enter date, you want to make sure that the start date is less than the enter date and that the enter date is greater than the start date. So you could use the before selection to validate that. Any questions about that? Okay. Let's go back into search. After selection, that's used to do some additional processing on the ID that the user selected. Let's say we're doing a selection on a file that has a 3-part key, but the piece of the key that we want is the second value. So it may be value asterisk value asterisk value that the ID is in, and we want the second one. So you can use the after selection process to pull that out. It doesn't really make sense in this scenario, but the after select is saying db value, which is the value that's being passed back to the calling program. I'm taking the field of db value, looking for an asterisk, and taking the second one and pushing it back to db value, so that I have the correct field when it sends it back to the form. Any questions about that? Okay. You can also use the before selection. I'm sorry. Let's back up. Now we want to take a look at the after display. As a prefix to that, we've been looking at these selection processes, and everything has to be clicked on to actually go back and select something. DesignBais in version 5 added some keyboard-driven searches and selections. So to allow that, let's jump to the system parameters, so that when a selection process comes up, the user can keep their hands on the keyboard and not have to move it to the mouse to select an item. So to set that up, you go into System Parameters and you click on Keyboard-Driven Searches and you click Submit. So now my keyboard-driven searches are active. When I go back to my selection process, if I were to run this test again, you'll now see I have select row. And when I do my selection, whoops, we have that active. Let's get this out of here. Delete. Submit. Search. Test. Search that puppy. Okay, so as soon as I click on search, you'll notice the prompt is down in select row. So I can say, oh, okay, this isn't the page I want, let's go to the next page. And all I'm doing is pressing the page down and page up fields, keys, to go page up and page down. When I find the item I want, I can press it, like if I want item 7 on this page, and hit return, it brings back the item ID for that 7. Okay? So when I go to my form and click on it, I have the same features, and I can say, okay, well, I want 11 here, and it brings it back and populates. Well, we need to go one step further. As a user, I don't want to have to take my hand off the keyboard to click that search. So what we can do, if we go into the properties of this field and we look down here at Control Enter button event. So when the Enter button, when the Control Enter is pressed on this field, it's going to run b.search. So you can run any button on this form, but I'm going to run b.search. So let's turn the test mode on. I'm in this field. I hit Control Enter, and bang. Now I've got my form. I can say, okay, let's see everything that has AP in its name. Tab to the search. Hit Enter, and now I've got the list of those items. I can say I want item 9. Enter, and I'm in that field, and I don't have to take my hands off the keyboard. And I can submit that directly from here. There is another option here that says, okay, well, if I want to do that, and if I want to do everything on one screen, like if I want to enter AP here and press the Control Enter, I want that AP to be put in the top up here. Okay, so let's take a look at that and see how we can possibly do that. So in the selection, I'm now going to, in the after display event, I'm going to add my program. Now, after display can be used for a couple different things. It could be used for what I'm going to use it for, or it can be used to add default values to these dictionary items. So I would set DB usage var 11 equal to ABC in my after display event, and ABC would be displayed as the default value. But instead of doing that, I'm going to come back to my, let's go to the top, and my after display event, which is right here. Look for my search, which is right there. And so now DB key is the item ID of my parent form. So DB key is this field. That's attribute 0 of my form. So I'm saying if DB key does not equal a null, then set DBC client name equal to what's in DB key and null out DB key. So I'm basically saying move this into this field. Then I'm saying if DB record client name does not equal a null or suburb does not equal a null, then set bsearch DesignBais equal to a common block variable called button click, DB button click. What DB button click does is it runs, it acts as you were clicking on this button. And that button is this search button. That's search DesignBais. So I'm telling DesignBais programmatically to click that button. And then I'm sending it back to the routine. So what this is going to do is it's going to automatically start my selection. So let's control EI here. Let's make sure I did this properly. Yep. Submit that. Come to here. So now I have AP in the client code, which is the DB key. Control Enter. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I have to turn the test mode. Because we're using keyboard-driven searches, every time we make a change to a selection process, we have to refresh the browser session that we're running in. Because we use DB local form to build that key press. You'll learn a little bit more about DB local var, DB local form in a upcoming webinar, probably in the Forms Designer Advanced. Okay, so let's save that, exit, refresh, and go back into the form. The client, form 1. Test mode on, AP, control Enter. There you go. So what it did is it moved AP to my client name, so it displayed client name, and it forced a click on search. So now as a user, I click somewhere, I'm prompted for row. So let's start that again. Let's do control Enter. Okay, and now I'm not moving my mouse. Let's go to 8, Enter, and then I can tab through it. Any questions about this or anything that I've done so far today? Well, I've pretty much gone through everything in the selection process. You want me to show the code again, Brent? Sure, no problem. What piece do you want to see? Okay. This is a very easy operation to do. If you missed some of it, I am recording this, and it will be on the website later on tonight. Not on the website, but on the YouTube channel for DesignBais, so you'll be able to see that and go through it again if you had any other questions. Are there any other questions that I can answer? Sure, Bruce, what's up? Just waiting for Bruce to type his question. Must be a long one. There you go. Is the problem with search and field validation? I'm not sure. The question is, has the problem with search and field validation been fixed in version 6? I'm not sure what you're referring to, but if it was a known issue, then it was fixed. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. If you come up with a question, you're more than welcome to send it to support@designbais.com. Feel free to attend any of our other webinars. We have about 8 or 9 still left, and they go through the end of January. Like I said, these webinars are recorded. All of them to date are on our YouTube channel, so you can just go to YouTube and search for DesignBais, and you will see all of them there. I thank you very much for your time and hope to see you on the next webinar.